a lot of founders don't understand. This isn't a 1-year ride, a 5-year ride, or a 3-year ride. It's 15 years.
What is one go-to-market tactic or strategy that's working?
I'm old school, and I think it's BDRs all day, every day.
That's a hot take.
I think any company I see that's struggling is because they never built the BDR muscle and outbound muscle within the company. Outsourcing it, thinking AI is going to do it for them. But if you have that internally, you control the levers, you control your destiny. Obviously, it's great to solve product market fit right away. Day one would be awesome, but that doesn't happen. We're all building for tomorrow.
Was there a moment where you're like, okay, we have something big and this is going to rock?
Once you're doing $1 million quarters, there's no question in my mind I could have $10 million quarters. Once you start seeing renewals kick in and upsells, then you really start loving SaaS.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Ever wonder what automating your entire outbound workflow could do for your revenue team? Apollo brings this to life by centralizing your entire go-to-market execution in one platform. Sellers using automation in their outbound efforts see a 70% increase in open rates and 4 times more meetings booked, while of course saving hours and hours on manual, tedious tasks that we all hate to do. Their tried and tested library of built-in workflow templates will help you get started from scratch, even if automated outreach is brand new to you. Topping the list of sales platforms, Apollo has over 7,000 reviews and a 4.8 star rating on G2. I'm a big fan. Go to apollo.io/GTM now so that you can schedule some time with their team to get set up and get successful using their platform. Now, on to the episode. Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the GTM podcast. Your host, Scott Barker, here. I mean, I say it all the time, but one of my favorite things about this podcast is it just gives me the opportunity to connect with humans that are involved in, the fund and our portfolio. And this next guest has been involved in the fund and a supporter since really the early days. So can't thank him enough for that. And we've met a handful of times, and he's welcomed me into his office in New York. Very close with my partner, Max, but super excited to just share the next hour with him and really dive into it. I am joined by Mark Ghermezian. Mark, welcome, man.
Thanks for having me.
Pumped to have you, man. Pumped to have you. And if our listeners are not familiar with Mark, so I'll do a quick bio. We'll keep it short. But Mark is the co-founder at Braze. Not familiar with Braze. They went public in November 2021. He's also the founder and GP at MXV Capital, and also co-founder and CEO at Ginger and Tilde, 2 companies that he actually incubated. Also a father on top of all that. Do you sleep, man? How are you pulling all this off?
Good people and a great wife. So that's what all it comes down to. Like people in the office that help scale and a great wife that allows me to do what I'm doing.
I love that, man. That's great. If we could stop the podcast there. Just you need great people and a great wife, and you're good. You're set. I love it. And correct me if I'm wrong. You are either Canadian or at least grew up in Edmonton. Is that correct?
Yeah, I grew up in Edmonton in Canada, so I'm definitely Canadian.
Hell yeah, man. A fellow Canadian. Has that shaped your identity at all as an entrepreneur, being Canadian, being this kind of like smaller sibling of this big behemoth?
Growing up in Edmonton, you're small town and just like super cold weather and lots of hockey, lots of skiing, and just kind of growing isolated from what's going on in the world. So I think you just kind of grow up having to be creative and doing things like always going outside, regardless of the weather. There was no concept of a snow day for school. We'd go to school in snow pants. You'd be outside at recess during the winter, and you'd figure out how to keep yourself busy with your friends, regardless of what was going on. So I think, and I'm sure that's true in other parts of the world too, and where kids grow up, but I think it just kind of like forces you to get out, be creative, a little independent, and so on.
Yeah. Sounds like forced you to, get out, be active, but also like go inward a lot. Like there was probably a lot of times where you're just chilling inside and there's not a ton to do because it's freezing outside and you're just thinking.
Lots of Sega Genesis, Sonic Hedgehog, NHL 95. I'm kind of like dating myself here, but a lot of stuff like that, and a lot of biking, a lot of outdoor garage hockey, floor hockey, and stuff like that. But I loved it.
Cool, man. Well, let's dive right into it. So you founded Braze back in 2008, I believe it was. Fly me back to 2008. Who was Mark in 2008?
So I just got married. I I just wrapped up a MVNO. So I started a company while I was in college. We were buying minutes at wholesale from AT&T and rebranding the service. While I was in school, I was like signing distribution deals with like FYE music stores and Sam Goody music stores, Follett bookstores, which is power all the bookstores on just about every college campus in the United States. Um, and that's what got me into the whole like tech ecosystem, because I was doing deals with Motorola, Nokia, all the handsets around that. And that company actually didn't work out, but that was kind of like my foray into um, Appboy, which is now called Braze, just because like I don't know if people are familiar with MVNOs, but back then you had Disney, who had made actually a Disney phone, an ESPN phone. Um, and a lot of these phones kind of turn into what are the apps we use on our phones today. Um, so 2008 got married, and then I started. My family actually made some investments in oil and gas in Houston. I actually moved to Houston with my wife. Um, Conventional onshore field, Texas oil and gas fields. And at night, I was just kind of like building Braze or Appboy, thinking about what it was. That's when they launched the iPhone. I'm like, wow, everyone's going to make an app. All the brands are going to have apps. They're all going to want to communicate with their customers on the apps in mobile. There's something there. And it's funny, I had no idea a company like Salesforce existed. I didn't know what the acronym CRM standard for. It was just a pure idea that I had, like, looking at it. I'm like, everyone's going to do this. And if I can really power the data and the messaging behind it, there's probably something powerful here.
That's super cool. I didn't actually know that ESPN and Disney like actually started with like hardware. Like they thought the future was going to be like in physical.
Yeah, Virgin Mobile, they don't own a network. They have a deal with Sprint where they piggyback off of their network, and then they rebrand the service as Virgin Mobile. So the ESPN made a phone, and you would get exclusive content on this phone by becoming an ESPN subscriber. Um, and they also did a deal with Sprint. And the same thing with Disney. They made a Disney phone. Obviously, those fell flat on their face. The acquisition costs didn't make sense, and all you couldn't really compete with the large carriers on price and all that stuff. Um, but it really, I think it just got people thinking about like, wow, what if I could have content on a phone? Um, and then when obviously Apple came out, that's where the whole world of apps came, and it's all this content that you can get through an app and native apps and so on.
Yeah. So that was one of the things that I guess trends you were able to identify. Obviously, like entrepreneurship, you have to sometimes play Nostradamus of like, all right, where are we going? Where are we going in the next 5 years? And you had this front row seat to this first iteration, which was, hardware technology. And you're like, this is likely going to live in an app. iPhone comes out, you like, double down. How did you, so you have this idea, you start building the software. How did you go about landing your first customers? Like, what were those conversations like?
Yeah, it's even like a step before that. We we had an idea. Um, we got our first round of financing, which was the seed. It was just me, no co-founders at the time, um, and I moved back to New York once we closed the round and started putting feelers out there. Met my co-founders. Someone introduced us. They got excited. We then started, they came in, kind of looked at all the stuff I built. Um, and we did it through contractors. So they kind of refreshed the whole thing. Um, Started bringing in their friends and on the engineering team. And we were really early. So at the time, the ecosystem in mobile was build apps, acquire customers, and analytics like attribution and so on. There was no concept of retention, um, which was interesting. So you had companies like Flurry, I don't know if you remember the company, who would help you with like attribution and analytics. You had Mixpanel, which is obviously still around today, which was like an awesome analytical platform that everybody was using. You had Localytics, which was doing more attribution stuff. And then you had us, we're trying to convince brands that hey, you need, once you acquire a customer, like you need to keep them. So it took a couple years um, to get our first customer, um, which was very interesting. And I think kudos to me and the team, like we didn't derail from the vision. It could have been really easy for us to be like, you know what, like let's go build analytics or an attribution platform because that's what everyone wants today. But we knew that like you build an app, you acquire customers, you need to retain them. So we were just waiting for that to happen, and once it happened, it tilted in our favor. And at that time, we just then had the best product, which is still true today.
I mean, it makes sense. It's almost like the market needed to go through some of those cycles of losing customers before they would wake up to the kind of retention problem, and finally see like, okay, this is a need. Where my head went was, you're still founding companies today, but you're also on the investing side. Not acquiring customers for a few years can be seen as a red flag. When you're looking at a company, has your experience at Braze shifted how you think about sometimes how long it can take to actually hit product market fit when you're analyzing new companies to get involved in?
Absolutely. Like I think like a lot of founders today think they need obviously it's great to solve product market fit right away. Day one would be awesome. But that doesn't happen. Um, I, I, I tend to be very patient with our founders to find product market fit, but eventually founders need to pick a lane. Like you need to have conviction in your intuition and just stay focused. I think it's when you're like going this way, then you're going that way, and you're going like if you keep switching every month, it's impossible to build an identity. It's impossible to figure out your marketing. It's impossible to keep your AEs knowing what they're selling, and then it's impossible to get product engineering to know what the hell you're building. That being said, I totally get like in the early days, you have a small knit team, let's say 5 people or so, and you're kind of figuring out what the hell you're doing and you're trying to execute on the thesis. But I think eventually you need to like have that conviction and stay in your lane and hope that the market will come to you. Because we're all building for tomorrow. Like when I say tomorrow, like many years from now, we're not building for what the market needs today. Um, I think that's the biggest thing, like to make sure that like the founders have conviction because we invested in them, and you want them to kind of have that like confidence. Once you see like there's a founder that's losing confidence in their original thesis and then they're just like scrambling, I think that's when things kind of fall apart.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really hard thing for founders. And it's likely from, sometimes the wrong VCs, putting too much pressure to get results quickly. But you do see this need or want to pivot fast, right? Move quickly, break things. The old saying is what you're saying is kind of like the kiss of death sometimes. If you pivot too much too early, you're not even going to give the market a chance to see if they want your original vision.
Yeah. And sometimes Not sometimes, a lot of times the market doesn't even know what they want. I think a good example is the iPhone. We all thought we wanted Blackberries. We all thought we wanted a keyboard, and there were many people that fought it. And a lot of companies, to their dismay, like they did fight it, and they're not around. And I think like a lot of times, even when I'm talking to customers around what we're building and trying to get feedback, it's like take 10% of what they're saying, right? And like it's funny. I was telling my son this the other day. I'm like, when you have an idea, get feedback from people, but no one will ever understand your vision and what you want to do. No one sees how you see it. No one sees how you see the world. No one sees how you see the opportunity. Um, so like take it with a grain of salt, get feedback, iterate on some of it. But if you think there's something there, go for it, right? What do you have to lose, right? You just got to try. So it's the same thing with our founders. Like talk to the customers, get the feedback. But again, they don't understand the full vision that you have, and that's really important.
Super important. I see it on the investing side internally at GTM Fund. We're so lucky to have all these incredible experts in these given categories. So, when we're looking at something and we're later stage DD, we can bring in, 8 experts. But if we overweighted all of their opinions, we would probably never do a single deal ever. There's always reasons not to do something. And sometimes you just have to, put in the work, get the conviction, and see that vision through.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think like going back to your question, like we were the worst performing company at Braze or Appboy for many of the investors within their portfolio. So again, it reminds me a lot of like, yeah, there will be slow starts for many of these founders and their companies. But as long as they have that grit and persistence, um, I think they'll create their own luck and hopefully be successful.
Yeah. Was there a specific moment you can point to? Like, maybe you see like you have, like product market fit on paper, but was there a moment where you're like, okay, we have something big and this is going to rock?
Once we started having $1 million quarters, I'm like, there's no question in my mind I could have $10 million quarters. That was it. Like once you're doing $1 million quarters, there's a massive opportunity. Um, and once you start seeing the renewals kick in and the upsells, then you really start loving SaaS too. And you're like, holy shit, this is gonna be massive. Um, I think that's true with like many companies. Like lots like get stuck at 2 million AR and they can't break out to get to like the 4 million AR, which is $1 million quarters. I think that's the aha moment that you're looking for in your portfolio companies and as a founder. Because if you can get $1 million quarters, like you know, there's another 10 out there or 40 out there, right? So like it just makes so much more sense. So I think that was the aha moment for me, and I never really appreciated how big Braze could be in the early days because I didn't really fully grasp like the market size that this could get to. I knew it could get big. I knew it could get to 100 million AR. Uh, I don't know. I don't think any of our investors thought it would be a $500 million AR business and maybe one day $1 billion AR business. But that's what's really awesome about some of the markets that you get into.
That's wild. That was going to be one of my questions. If you began with that end state in mind of like, oh, we're going to IPO one day. And it sounds like, that wasn't the vision. You thought you would build a big, healthy business, but
In the early days, like when we'd interview people, they always ask, oh, what do you like? Where do you want to take the company? And I always just said, I just want to build an awesome company. Like the score will take care of itself. Like if we can hire great people, we could make our customers happy. We can create ROI for our customers, and we can do this really well. We'll create a great company, and then we'll control our destiny. I think once we saw that we were hitting 100 million AR, at that point, you're telling everybody we're building an IPO company. Which again, like it's all about mindset, right? So it's like we're getting to a million AR. That's the goal. And that's what we're gonna do. And then after that, it's like we're gonna get to 5 and then 10. And then you have to like run through the halls with the flag that's what we're gonna do. Um, and it takes a certain like matureness like through that evolution to get there, right? And I think you need to take it in steps to achieve the end goal. But if you take it in steps, like that next step, you don't know what that next step is till you hit the next step, right? And I think it's so yeah. In the early days, I just wanted to create an awesome company, like awesome culture, awesome people, surround myself with people that I could learn from, learn, iterate, execute. Um, but we were also a massive winning culture at Braze. Um, we did anything to win in a healthy way, obviously. Um, and we were also the underdogs. Like we were in New York um, when the only other company was literally like Guilt, um, and every other hot company was in SF. So, and we had great competitors that were backed by Sequoia, that were backed by Kleiner, and we just felt like we were the underdogs. So, went on a little bit of a rant there with like your question, but yeah, we just wanted to build an awesome company and kind of see where it went from there.
We love the rants. Keep them coming. The rants are the best part of this podcast often. So, but man, it's and looking back, like you did it, and it's certainly rarefied air to build a software company that is successful. It's even rarer to have goes public. How did that feel at the time, and how does it feel now? Do you ever get to sit back and be like, "Fuck yeah"?
Yeah, I think it's super humbling to kind of think back and see what we did. Incredibly grateful, I think, for when I mentioned my wife, like just enabling me to be able to do all the stuff I did. So you really think about all the people around you, but then you also think about like, wow, like I'm so lucky I had those co-founders, um, and the investors, um, and the different hires that chose not to join, but then we got someone else. So you reflect on a lot of like all the things that happened, and they all had to happen to get to where we are today. So don't question my mind. Like I can tell you so many stories of like this person left or that person didn't work out, and I was like, you're bummed. Like as a founder, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I really wanted that guy or that girl or whatever it was, and so on. But it's very humbling, um, but it's an amazing feeling, and incredibly grateful. Like it's like I don't know. I don't look at it as like I did it. I think it really was the whole team, customers, like everything had to check off to make it happen.
Yeah. I feel like one of the red threads on this podcast, which I appreciate, is the humbleness of the vast majority of our guests, and frankly, a lot of them are like, there's luck that happened. We worked really hard, but there were some bounces that we got. There were certain people that if like this one thing doesn't happen, this doesn't happen, and then this doesn't happen. And I think that's pretty cool because you don't hear that too often, you know.
It's a real domino effect. Even like investors that passed, like as a founder, like you work so hard to raise the next round of financing. You finally get to partner meetings. You're super pumped about that fund. The partner's telling you like, we're going to get this done. And then you get the call and they're like, I couldn't get it over the finish line. We love you. Da, 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 da. Your whole heart drops. You're like, can't even feel your legs in that moment. It's all for the best, I learned. Like like the investor group that we had, for whatever reasons that they came in, I don't think we would be where we are today without that investor group, because everyone's like, it's like everyone adds like their own little thing. 1% here, 2% here, 5% here. It's just like it's all about that. So I learned that like when things don't work out, it's all for the best. Like I try not to get worked up about it.
Life is going to happen the way life is going to happen. Bounces sometimes go your way, sometimes they don't. And the beautiful thing about, looking back, at least my personal journey, I think a lot of people, is when you do have the ability to look back, it's like, oh, that was always supposed to happen, even though it sucked at the time. Like, look what ended up happening. That made me think of a good question for a lot of the founders that listen to this is, what's your advice for entrepreneurs who might be in the fortunate position where they can pick who they take money from? How would you sort of structure a cap table as an entrepreneur today? And we don't have to mention like names or firms, but like how would you go about thinking about it?
Who do you want to surround yourself with that you can be yourself with, right? For some reason, a lot of founders think they just need to be like show like this different persona when they're talking to investors. And if you need to do that on an ongoing basis with your investor group, it's not good. I think it's a group that you can show your weaknesses to and one that you can be vulnerable to, that you can be candid with. So to achieve that, I think it's a little bit of like who's genuine as an investor that really wants to help you and be successful. Um, what's the diverse group that you can create around the table? And obviously, like early stage, it's not like you're having 5 investors. I mean, like funds, like you can have angel investors. You might have one lead and another co-investor, and call it a day. But I think it's really important to have the ones that can really be there, support you. Life's too short to have assholes. Like even if they're like top tier funds, and you're not feeling the partner there and so on, it's not worth it. So that's kind of how I think about it. Um, and I think that's what's really awesome about the emerging managers and all the different funds today. It creates optionality for founders. So you can almost choose like who you want to build this company with over the next 15 years. And I think that's something that a lot of founders don't understand. This isn't a 1-year ride, a 5-year ride, or a 3-year ride. It's 15 years. Like some people say 12. I think it's 15. Like I was noodling on Braze from 2008 to 2011 by myself. And then I closed my seed in 2011, and that's when my founders joined. So on paper, like the company started in 2011, but for 3 years, I was like spending my own time building this, thinking about it, and this and that. And I think now it's like 16 years from when I put pen to paper to even think about the idea. So I think like it's like there's some investors that I'm like so close with now, like they're friends. Um, we know everything about each other, um, and it's like these lifetime friends that you'll just have. So I think that's like a really important thing. It's not a transaction, right? Um, building a company from the bottom up is like a lifelong kind of thing, and these are people that you're going to spend a lot of time with. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. The benchmark is, would I want to hang out with this person for 16 years? And could I learn from this person for 16 years?
Yeah, and the same is true for investors. I think like, is this a founder I want to spend time with? Um, which is hard sometimes because like they may have a great idea and you're just like, I don't know. Like, um, so I think that's really important too. So the opposite is true from the investor perspective to the founder.
Totally. Yeah. And that one's not, I think, thought about as much. But I think to your like original point, if like you have to put on a front, or you don't really like vibe with someone, you have to create this almost like false energy, and you have to give that away. And that's energy that could be spent on creative tasks, on like actually building the business, instead of like hyping yourself up to have another shitty conversation with this person you don't really like. We're going to take a quick pause from this interview to talk about hiring. Hiring for startups is really hard. You are battling the attention of smart, driven people, being bombarded with a ton of opportunities. Plus, it can be time consuming going through all the candidates, and challenging to know who is the best fit. Should you hire the person who's been there, done that, the up and comer stepping into the bigger role for the first time? Is stage fit or domain expertise more important for this particular role? Most recruiting firms fill an order. For us, we highly recommend IPS. They are just a different breed of search firm. They've dug into your business to understand its current state and the future vision and are relentless in their pursuit of finding the very best leaders, salespeople, marketers, engineering talent that you need. Integrity Power Search has placed over 2,000 candidates for early to mid stage startups in its 12-year history, with specialists that focus by function, leveling from mid level ICs all the way up to the C level. All right. So, with a very senior team, I've met them all. They're pretty rad, including past startup operators. They've seen firsthand the change of trajectory your company can take when you are intentional and aggressive about bringing the right people at the right time. So whether you want advice, have one hard to fill role, or you have a full team build out, we can't recommend IPS enough. Visit Integrity Power Search. That's www.integritypowersearch.com to learn more or connect with them on your next search. Let's talk. It's a good segue into kind of what you're doing now, which is MXV, and you've incubated 2 companies. Let's talk a little bit about this incubation model you have at the firm, because you're going back to ground zero again, which is kind of insane. How does that feel?
I love it. Look, at the end of the day, I'm a builder. I love building companies. I love solving problems. I love bringing people together. Um, it's such an awesome thing to do. And I think it's very unique to the startup ecosystem that you can do this kind of stuff. And just like learning something new every day. And that's part of the reason why, like at MXV, like I love early stage, pre-seed and seed. We can really get into the weeds, help them think about their product, the product market fit, their go to market, pricing, hiring, like all that stuff. So I think like I never thought I don't want to be an incubator, and we were talking about this offline before, but like it's hard to sit in a room and try to think of what the next big idea is. I think like the best ideas kind of come to you through just like life and the journey, and you're like, oh, like a light bulb goes off. And I think when those light bulbs go off for us at MXV, um, that's when I'm like, oh, you know what, maybe we could build this. Let's do it ourselves. And I love it because it also keeps me true as a operator with my founders too, that I invest in. So yeah, at the end of the day, I'm a builder. So I just enjoy it, and I hope I can continue to do it for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good I call it of what we were talking before we actually hit record. Is there's a lot of incubators out there that are almost like they're forced to come up with ideas and concepts, and it can feel a little bit unnatural, right? Like I know when we're talking to great founders, 90% of the time they're just solving the problem that they've lived for the last like 6 years. Like no one solved this problem, so I had to do it. And I feel like those were where the best ideas come from. And congrats on the latest round for Ginger, man. That was cool to see. You guys are crushing it.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know what? It's I think raising the Ginger Series A again, like raising rounds for Braze weren't easy, but sometimes they feel so distant. And then doing it again now makes it feel so much more real when we're talking to our founders around like their preparation for their A's. Um, it's a hard market out there. So one, yes, there's a lot optionality, um, but the bar has also been raised, especially for Series A. Um, so I think for me, like it was very humbling to sit on the other side of the table, pitch Ginger, tell them what we're building. And some people think like it was easier because of my pedigree with Braze and all that, but this is fintech. It's a completely new industry. Um, it was hard. It was hard, but I think it was good that it's hard because it helps you think through what you're building, the market opportunity, um, and kind of like helps me identify who I want to work with as well. And then taking that feedback with our founders and our portfolio companies and stuff like that too. So it was hard, but we're happy we got it done.
Yeah. Was it harder to raise Braze's Series A or Ginger's Series A? And you can plead the fifth, but I'm curious because like there's a beauty in like being naive and young, and you're just like, I don't know how hard this is.
Braze's Series A was hard as hell. We were down to 2 weeks of payroll and we didn't have a term sheet.
Shit.
Yeah, like we were nobodies in New York building a lifecycle marketing platform. Customers not that great at the time, numbers, but we had a great platform and a great team. So Rally Ventures like leaned in with us and we got it done. So it was definitely hard because like one, I didn't know the ecosystem of like other people. I was scrambling for intros for Series A investors. So obviously our seed investors introduced us. At least for Ginger, like I have the ecosystem, like I know the people. So getting that initial meeting was obviously easier. But the ratio, I think, used to be maybe 12, 15 to 1 to hopefully get a term sheet. I think this market is 25 to 1, 30 to 1. So it was a lot of iterations. It was definitely hard. I didn't expect it to be that hard. It was hard, but I'm happy we got the investor. There was a group of investors I wanted, and I'm happy we were able to get one of them to come in, which was PayPal Ventures, and Velvet Sea, who came in, and then our group of investors came in as well.
Hell yeah. It's just hard out there for everyone, whether you're crushing it or not. It's nothing is to be taken for granted in this market.
Absolutely.
What are some of the, I guess, pitfalls you were able to avoid with Ginger because of your time building Braze?
My idea around hiring has changed. Like I really love hiring problem solvers, almost like individual contributors. That doesn't mean they can't be managers, but it's like people that I don't have to tell what to do is really important. And not that I did a lot of that at Braze, but it's much more clear to me that you want problem solvers that can get out there, execute, and come back to you once a week and say like, "This is what's going on. This is what we're doing." Um, and I think like for me, that's kind of how I've been thinking about this, and just being a lot more proactive around how we go to market, how we're thinking about product market fit, and just not wasting time. I think that's the difference. But there's a lot of learning. It's hard sometimes. Like it's better not to know what's on the other side of the wall, so you just like jump through. Obviously, as a second time founder, you have a good sense of what's coming, where it's going. So I think for me, I can identify like the holes in potential like hires or people that are working, and kind of think about how we navigate those, how we set up like our go to market, our BDRs, our AEs, outbound motions, the sequences, like all that stuff. Like stuff like I didn't even know what the hell a BDR was when I started Braze, right? And just kind of like marketing, product marketing versus growth marketing, demand gen, like all these things are a lot more clear to me, around what works and what doesn't work. So where you allocate funds and your time is a lot more clear to me versus before it was like trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. Right.
No, that makes sense. It's like less time having to like learn the fundamentals and more time like testing which fundamentals are going to work in this specific case. And your point on hiring, I think, is so huge, especially with AI and all these new technologies that are coming online that will just supercharge these problem solvers. These I call them 0 to 1 people that you barely have to onboard. You're like, hey, here's all our resources, here's our material. This is what we need you to do, and they come back with like a plan. And we've been so fortunate at the fund to hire Paul early, who's a very much a 0-1, Sophie early, very much 0 to 1. My question to you is how sometimes I think it's luck, intuition. Like, how do you now test for that that ability to create something from nothing, because I think it is arguably the most important thing when hiring at the early stage.
Yeah. Honestly, it's like the 10,000 hour thing, right? It's like you do something for 10,000 hours, it's almost becomes like a natural, it's part of your body and your DNA. So it's like you can identify the right people pretty quickly through the interview process. You could identify the holes pretty quickly because you're not always going to be right. Um, so I think it just becomes like a natural part of how we operate and how we work and how we view things and how we think, um, without even realizing it, right? And I think that's something that a lot of founders need to, through the 10,000 hours, they'll get there as well. Um, and I think that's the hard part. It's patience too, right? Um, I think patience is key with this whole thing. Um, but yeah, like it eventually, as like you get going and start building, you identify problems, you identify market opportunities, and the same thing with hiring. You get a sense for like who's got that grit, who's got that persistence, who's bullshitting you versus who's not.
Yeah. Do you identify as a patient person? You mentioned patience. I feel like there's a huge balancing act between patience and then the ability to drive things forward and be like delusionally driven at the same time. Would you call yourself patient?
Yeah, I think net I am patient in everything. Um, so it takes a lot to rattle me, but I want execution. Right? Mm, So it's like it's a good balance between the two. Patience with execution, I think is super important. And I think you just gotta have to be patient with product market fit, patient with figuring out what works with your pricing, getting the first customer, hiring. Like you need to be very slow to hire. That's a lot of patience. I think that's hard. I think a lot of people aren't slow to hire because like, oh, yeah, I got to hire this person and got to get going. But guess what? You bring in the wrong person, that sets you back like 6 months, and that's 6 critical months for pre-seed, seed, or even Series A companies. Like incredible, like really valuable. So yeah, I think net, I am very patient. Um, well, it goes back to like you're not building for today, you're building for tomorrow, and that takes patience.
What I'm hearing is like you're you're patient with the results and impatient with execution. Like there are things we can do now, but they don't have to materialize overnight.
You have to like it's like I was on a call earlier with my team at Ginger. It's like you have these levers that you can like turn, and it's like this one with this one, or is it this one with that one? And like you're trying to like figure this out. So you got to be patient and kind of see like, okay, let's try this. And you need to test things out and be patient to see the results, but you have to keep testing to get there. So I think like I'm patient with like the testing and iteration. That's what I mean about like there's the execution layer, and and then I'm patient with the kind of figuring that part out. If that makes sense. As long as you're executing here and figuring things out, and then once you figure it out, it's like let's go, like press the gas. Um, so that's kind of how I think about it.
Makes total sense. I think that's a good way to frame it and think about it as any entrepreneur that's listening. So we often, talk through stories on this podcast, and I think humans just learn the best through stories. We can all sit here and like pontificate on what works and what doesn't. Do you have like a moment, whether it was at Braze, that was just we'll call it like the most impactful moment of your professional life? Does one stand out?
I was just always like a CEO that would like on go to market on product engineering. I let Bill and John run that. There's no way I would be able to provide feedback with those guys. Those guys are just like all-star top tier guys that I would trust with anything. Um, and obviously I get feedback, but like I wouldn't get my head in my toes or my head in there and get in the way. But go to market, I was like in every deal, everything. And I guess there wasn't a sense of like trust with the team. So one day, one of my investors, like Alex Lloyd with Accelerator, he's like, dude, you got to delegate. And he gave me this book. I think it's called I have to find it. It's a very short little book.
We'll put it in the show notes after once we find it.
Yeah. And it changed my life with like delegation. I was like, oh man, I need to delegate, because if you can't delegate, you can't scale. And I think I've become like a really good delegator now. So it's like, this is what we need to do. Go figure it out. This is how we have to execute. Let's come back. Setting goals, quotas, OKRs. Like there's a lot of things around that stuff. So that impacted me a lot. So instead of like being someone that has to have controls on everything, and obviously founders need to get their first customers. They need to lead the sales org to start. They need to do stuff like that. But you also have to let your team learn and iterate. It's like your kid needs to walk, they have to fall, and so on. So I think that really changed a lot of how I operate and how I think.
Yeah, I feel like if you're not delegating, you're almost robbing your team and the leaders around you of the lessons that like they could learn, and if you get enough of those feedback loops in, and if you rob them of enough, like they're just not going to be the leader you need them to be. What are sort of the pillars in your mind that makes you an effective delegator? You mentioned trust, so that's for sure, a huge one. You need to have complete faith and trust in your team that they can deliver as well or better, or at least work towards that. Is there any other things that makes you feel comfortable delegating and makes you, good at it?
Like you said, it's trust, it's alignment, right? So that's why I think like we implement OKRs every quarter. So our objective and our key results. So everyone's very aligned on what we're trying to do company wide. And then it's just like talking about what we need to do to execute against the OKRs, and then giving them the opportunity to execute on such, right? But holding a high bar. So they know there's a high bar here and there's high expectations. And I think I convey that well, but they know I'm patient. They know I'm not like micromanaging them. So I think like micromanagement can like be really ineffective. Um, so I kind of like let them go, and then we go and come back. Obviously, if there's like red flags happening, like I'll reach out and be like, "Hey, what's going on?" And I think like giving feedback has been really important. So like I literally go on Slack and I type feedback, and then I give them the feedback so they know what it is. um, so it's like I think feedback and just continuing letting them do what they need to do, but alignment I think is super important.
You said like trust, alignment, giving feedback, and then almost this idea of like demanding excellence, but being patient through their journey. They're not going to be, excellent off of day one.
Exactly.
I love it, man. But this has been awesome. Thank you so much for spending the time. I know you're a busy guy. I do have two final questions, and I always keep these the same, and they are intentionally vague, so you can take them any way you want. First question is, what is one thing that founders widely believe to be true today that you think is bullshit, or at least no longer serving us?
Wow. I think like what comes to mind for me is that it's like overnight success. It's not. The opposite is so true. And I think like in this generation, we're so used to on-demand everything: Netflix, food, cars,
Can't
Ubers.
Uber eat success? It doesn't work that way?
It's
There's no
like
delivery fee I
immediate
can pay?
gratification is like top of mind for everything. And I think the myth is that it's like I can do this. Not that you can't do it. It's like we're gonna be successful tomorrow. Like I'm gonna hit 10 million AR tomorrow. Like how quickly I got to 1 million. So I think like the myth that you can just like explode is not true, and that this is a marathon, not a sprint. I think that's super important. Um, and I think like going a level deeper, like founders are trying to cut corners to get that to that immediate gratification instead of building the foundation that they need to do that can then compound in the near future, right? Um, so I think that's the biggest fault or myth that I think like a lot of like founders don't realize. So that's probably one for me.
I like it. I had one of my old bosses say, if you cut corners now, you miss the learning on how to turn in the future. Like you won't know. Like if you cut that corner that might be small now, there might be a time in the future where you need to know that lesson that you cut, and you're robbing yourself of that.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great call out. The final question is, people listen to this pod, they're inspired, they've got some ideas now, but everyone's looking for like, what can I do right now? They're in the thick of it. It's hard out there. What is one go-to-market tactic or strategy that's working for either Ginger or Tilde right now?
I'm old school, and I think it's like BDRs all day, every day, and I think like building that internally is the best thing to do if you want a successful SaaS business. I think any company I see that's struggling is because they never built the BDR muscle and outbound muscle within the company. Outsourcing it, thinking AI is going to do it for them, trying to be cute with it doesn't work. And then the second thing is, I think like what's not working is running paid ads to acquire customers. Like it's like absolute bullshit to me to spend $1 to get a customer in. So what happens when you stop that? Your whole pipeline is going to dry up, right? So like it's not a business. Um, so like I just like it drives me crazy seeing founders say like I have this agency that's going to be doing my BDR motions for me, and they're going to boil the ocean for me, and they're going to get me 5 meetings. Is it going to be worth it because I'm getting 5 BDRs for the price of one? I'd rather you spend the money on the 5 BDRs internally and build that culture of the sequences, the outbound motions, and so on. So, and obviously there's like different types of SaaS, enterprise SaaS, blah blah blah. But I think that's like the biggest thing that I think at Ginger that we did is that we really focused on this, and it evolves. Like what worked yesterday may not work today with the BDR outbound motions. We're growing as quotas grow, as different things change. But if you have that internally, you can like, it goes back to those levers I was talking about. You control the levers, you control your destiny. You outsource this stuff. You're so dependent on them, and you have to train them to do it. And then what? Are any of those going to become your AEs? No. Like it's like completely backwards. So I think that's like the net of it for me.
You're speaking my language. I cut my teeth building BDR teams, and I used to tell my CEO all the time, this business function that we're building allows us to control our own destiny. That's what we're doing. Every other form of demand, it's really tough to repeat and scale and know consistently what's going to come in. But we do this right, we can do that. And yeah, it's the role's changing for sure. But I think there'll always be a place for BD teams. I love it, man. Well, Mark, thank you so much. Before I let you go, any hires you're making on the Ginger or Tilde team? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, on Ginger specifically, we're looking to build the BDR team. So anyone that wants to come into I think we're the fastest growing fintech, Series A fintech company in New York. It's been amazing. So we're hiring there. VP of credit. We're hiring in Ginger. At Tilde, we're actually hopefully coming out of stealth, and we're going to start announcing stuff. And we'll probably start looking to hire probably in Q4 or the first half of 2025.
Sweet. If you're listening to this and you've built BD teams, go work for this man. Huge opportunity at Ginger, and to learn from one of the best in the biz. Mark, thanks again, man. And for all those listeners, I say it every week, but listening's one thing, executing's totally different. Hopefully we gave you some ideas to take back to your business. Go run some tests, and we'll see you next week.